Hi there, everyone. Bryan from the Oraculos School of Astrology, and welcome to Mychal Fix My Stars, my new astrology hotline where I help real people troubleshoot real challenges that they face within their lives using the wisdom of astrology.
I guess my question is uh, when I was younger, I was never really interested in having kids, but more so, that's becoming something that's more top of mind for me now. And I would say that my husband and I could have probably tried a little bit harder, but haven't really had a lot of success getting pregnant yet. And then in the last month or so, things have gotten to a really stressful point for me, professionally and also for him. And so I feel like that's taking up a lot of the attention. And I think that has a lot to do with like the eclipse and stuff. But I'm wondering if I will be able to have a kid or I will end up having a kid and like what that might look like timing wise. And just kind of like if it's something that I would be happy with if I ended up doing it, becoming a mom. Yeah.
This is a medical astrology question. It's a very nuanced question, as all medical astrology is nuanced. And what I was just saying was that if you're going to practice medical astrology, you should have some fundamental understanding of human anatomy and physiology. And it's so easy to do that, basically. Sign up at your local community college, take Anatomy and Physiology 1, and if you pass it, take Anatomy and Physiology 2. If you want to practice an astrology that's based on another system of knowledge that is non astrological, it behooves you to know something about that other system, which is why it kind of gets under my skin when I hear people who are practicing medical astrology and they're talking about things that basically, anyway, I'm not going to get into that. But the point of the matter is that you have to know something. You can't know nothing. You cannot do medical astrology, and the only feather in your quiver is that you know astrology, because that is not sufficient. So, within this chart, we're going to be looking at the astrological signatures of pregnancy, period, and we'll see where that takes us. The ancients had this thought that fires. My ancestors are preventing me from saying the next thing I'm going to say, because the next thing I'm going to say could be a very potentially dangerous thing if taken out of context. So let me preface what I'm going to say within a larger bubble of astrological wisdom. The signs of the zodiac all fall into various categories. There are some signs that are signs of a beautiful voice. There are some signs that are mute. There are some signs that are growling signs. There are some signs that are quadrupeds or four-legged. There are some signs that are double-bodied. There are some signs that are fruitful. There are some signs that are semi-fruitful. There are some signs that are barren. All of the signs fall into a category specific to those signs, which is a very important thing to know because no one seems to know it. So that's the very first thing we want to know. The ancients, in assessing their astrology and in assessing the signs that landed on the cusps of houses, used that in a more magical, omen based astrological practice as a means of having a general idea or omen or concept as to what was occurring within that person's life within that particular area. So here we have a fire sign on the ascendant, a fire sign on the fifth house cusp. These things, from a medieval astrological perspective, are not necessarily things that bode, they're not necessarily things that we would naturally think of as being the most fruitful from the perspective of conception and childbirth are concerned. And I think a big part of that, especially with this native having such an angular Mars, she has Mars conjunct the 10th house cusp. She also has the Mars conjunct the Neptune, which I'm going to kind of ignore for a bit, but she definitely has the Mars conjunct the 10th house cusp. With a chart like this, a person like this really values and honors their own independence. And with a chart like this, a person like this probably doesn't want to change diapers. I think that that's really something that we see when a person is having a very strongly Martian impetus within their lives. There's a sense of I value my freedom, I value my autonomy. I value the fact that I am the only person I have to be responsible for. We also have the ruler of the second house here within the first house as well. And that's oftentimes an indication of I value my money and I value the things that my money can do for me. And I value knowing that I am a money maker within this world. This is a very good chart for a lot of reasons. The only thing in this chart that's problematic, the two things in this chart that are problematic are the moon and the Mercury. Other than that, everything, well, the Saturn as well, but other than that, everything within this chart, it's a very nice chart, and we don't really see charts as nice as these. So this person has the opportunity to manifest a great level of success within the context of her work endeavors, because she's highly, extremely supercalifragilisticexpialidociously work oriented by virtue of having the Mars ruling the ascendant and in the 10th house conjunct the 10th house cusp in Capricorn. And the one thing that seems to take away from that a bit is probably the fact that she also has the Mars in the conjunction with Neptune, which might mean that her job and her career might be a bit of an existential thing for her and might generate a bit of existential crisis for her within this lifetime. But that's a different story for a different day. The main point is that she has the rule of the ascendant in the 10th house. And from a Uranian astrology perspective, she has Mars conjunct the midheaven. Having Mars conjunct the midheaven is a wonderful thing in terms of somebody who's going to naturally be a career oriented person, because it says that she knows the value of being in a competitive industry, and that's not something that she's going to shy away from within this lifetime. She also has the Venus ruling the second house of money in a wonderful, delicious sextile relationship with Jupiter. She has the Venus in a sinister sextile to Jupiter, which is saying that from a monetary perspective, she's probably also doing well within this lifetime because she just has it like that. So these are wonderful things. She can be an entrepreneur who eats what she kills. If she's not killing it, she's not eating it. And that could be something that leads her to living a life of excitement, a life that where she enjoys the freedom and the change and the possibility to play the game of having a job, or play the game of being employed, or play the game to be able to shift her career hat as often and as frequently as she likes, because she enjoys the stimulation that comes from that. And this notion of pushing out a baby could be a bit of a drag, basically. So that's something that we see built into the landscape of this chart. It is a chart that heavily honors the value of freedom. And insofar as it heavily honors the value of freedom, did you ever watch that movie 12 Years a Slave? Well, I recently heard someplace that 30 is the new 18, which means that 30 is the new 18, which means that people are 30 years old and still at 30 years old living based on the good graces of their parents. And within the context of a chart like this, it's probably going to be a difficult thing for this native to really manifest that sort of intention or that sort of desire to be someone's caretaker for 30 years of not that person's life, but 30 years of her own life. Period. Now, I think the next thing that we see within this chart that is also a little bit tricky from a motherhood perspective, I won't say it's tricky from a fertility perspective, because we have all sorts of medical interventions that allow fertility to be possible when 200 years ago, that may not have been the case. From a motherhood perspective, she has the moon in an exact opposition with Uranus. And I have been known to often say that women who have the moon opposite Uranus don't want to manifest womanhood in the stereotypical way. They don't want to make you pancakes in the morning. They don't want to flip your eggs. They don't want to bake your bread. They don't want to come with you to your recital, because they don't want to manifest this concept of motherhood or this concept of womanhood in an orthodox traditional sort of way. So there could be a valuing of the freedom concept within this that is far more stimulating for her than specifically this value of being someone's mom. And while she said that at this point in her life, she is moved more in a direction where she specifically wants to be a mother because that's something that she's actively trying to accomplish at this moment. There's a lot going on within her chart that says, but I still want to go on vacation. When I want to go on vacation, I still want to do my own thing. And I still want to be a free woman who has the ability to manifest womanhood on my own terms. And very often, when you push a baby out of your body, your manifesting of womanhood becomes very specific to the way how that child, or to the needs and the requirements of that child within this lifetime. So you've asked me a very complicated question, and I mean, no judgment, but it's a tough one. So we see that manifesting as well. Very often within the charts of women, when there's this sort of tight connection between the moon and Uranus as well, there can even be a sense of a menstrual irregularity. And the menstrual irregularity that we find with moon Uranus can be a scanty flow or a spotty flow, or some months it doesn't even come at all. So it feels like the menstrual cycle is all over the place. That's one of the ways how the moon Uranus can manifest. Whereas conversely, Moon Pluto can manifest as heaviness during menstruation. Moon Uranus can manifest as a scanty, erratic menstrual situation, which is the body's physiological way of manifesting this idea of, I don't really want to manifest womanhood once a month just because that's what I'm supposed to do. So it's a very interesting dynamic in that regard as well that we see coming through. Now, with that being said, let's talk more specifically about this idea of the child and this idea of childbirth within this chart. We see the ruler of the fifth house in the first house, and from a horary astrology perspective, if she were asking the question, will I have a child in this lifetime? And we were answering that for her from a horary astrology perspective, we'd say, yes, surely you would have a child within this lifetime. You have the ruler of the fifth house in the first house. Therefore, that's representing this notion of a dwelling in the houses. Dwelling in the houses is a particular mode of horary astrology perfection that allows something to come to pass without much effort. So if this were a horary astrology chart, we would say yes, you would definitely have a child as a result of having the ruler of the fifth house in the first house, because that is fulfilling this concept of perfection by dwelling in houses. Now, our rules for horary astrology aren't necessarily that different from our rules for regular schmegular natal astrology, and so this could also apply within a natal context as well. So, from a natal promise perspective, the promise of the child seems to be very possible. It seems to be very strong. It also seems to be very likely. Now, within the context of Indian astrology or Jyotish, neither the Sun nor Mars were thought to be planets that were very fertile. And the reason for that is because the ancient Indians and the ancient Western astrologers as well thought that both the Sun and Mars were too hot and dry in order to make babies, basically. And so for the ancients, if you had either the Sun or Mars in your fifth house, that could be an indication that within this lifetime, you probably don't have a womb that is, once again, ancient physiology, but you probably don't have a womb that is moist enough or soft enough or whatever the case is in order to really manifest the sort of childbirth that you're desiring, because their thought was that the Sun and Mars would burn the seed, or the Sun and Mars would burn the egg if the Sun and Mars were in the fifth house. Now, once again, we live in the year 2023, it's a different world, but back then that would be one of the things that would be a contraindication for them as far as childbirth would be concerned. Now, similar to the chart that I read a while ago, where I spoke to the native about her having one brother as a result of having Leo on the third house cusp, I don't want to say this next thing because, once again, I find that, this is the thing that people run with when I've said a lot of things, but whatever, I'll say it because whatever, I'll say it. Having Leo on the fifth house cusp and having the Sun as the ruler of the fifth house cusp in Aries can be an indication that the native Once again, if I were practicing astrology in the 13th century, I would say that this could be an indication that the native would have one child within this lifetime, and that one child would be a son. And that's because we have a masculine sign on the fifth house cusp. We have the sun in the masculine sign ruling the fifth house. And so that is an indication that the native would have a son if we were practicing astrology purely within a 13th century model. We're not currently practicing astrology purely within a 13th century model, but it doesn't mean that those rules don't apply. This could very well be indicative of the native having a son within this lifetime, and that the native might have one bouncing baby full of joy who she loves with all of her heart and soul, and she becomes very deeply identified with this child who becomes her pride and joy within this lifetime. So good for you. So that is one of the things that we see going on within this chart. And at the same time, we also see the sun in the trine relationship with Uranus, and we also see the moon in the opposition with Uranus. And these things can be indicative of the fact that there may need to be some form of a medical intervention that she employs as a means of assisting her within her journey with fertility. Wonderfully, we live in the year 2023, where you don't have to bite off the head of a chicken, spit over your shoulder, and swallow a ruby in order to have medical intervention. You can actually go to a doctor and begin a course of treatment, or you can go to a fertility specialist and begin a program that's specifically geared towards increasing the chances of fertility within this lifetime. And those chances can either be something along the lines of IVF, or those chances can be something more along the lines of some medically assisted pregnancy that increases the odds of the native becoming pregnant via a natural means. But the point of the matter is that that is one of the ways how we can interpret the moon in an opposition with Uranus. That's also one of the ways how we can interpret the sun in the trine relationship with Uranus. So those options are available. We sometimes also see this manifesting within the charts of women who would rather have the embryo and the fetus carried by another woman. And so we see this sometimes coming up within the charts of people who choose to go down the route of working with a surrogate. So that could also be a possibility. However, if I were to put this all together in a nutshell, I would say that this chart, from a traditional astrological perspective, does have the ability to create the sort of story of childbirth that the native is looking for, and it may not happen in a traditional way because she herself has never wanted to manifest womanhood in a traditional sort of way. So, if that is the case, then chances are the womb might probably say, well, hey, I don't want to manifest this in the traditional way either. And so that might involve some form of positive medical intervention that increases the odds of fertility. IVF is one of those things. There are also other forms of hormone treatments that increase the odds of fertility, and there could also be the option of surrogacy, just because I think that that notion of surrogacy is a very moon Uranus sort of way about going about this notion of having a child within this lifetime. Now, the last thing that I'll do, because it's worth doing, because I'm nothing at all if I'm not a Uranian astrologer, is we can go and take a look at some of the midpoints of pregnancy within this chart. And these are midpoints that I usually would look for within the chart of a woman as far as this notion of fertility is concerned. The midpoints of pregnancy, in general, we want to look at the moon. This is a fact of life, but also we want to look at the moon Venus midpoint. And then we'll also take a look at her Venus Zeus midpoint from a Uranian astrology perspective to see what that has to say. So her moon Venus midpoint is at 1 degree 47 minutes, and we scroll down to see 147. She has the moon Venus. Lady, you're going to have a son. And chances are that's probably going to be a one and done sort of situation, because the sun is a one and done sort of planet. But you have the sun on your moon Venus. We really don't have to look much further than that, because your moon Venus midpoint is 147 and your sun is literally at 147. I mean, I don't have much more to say than that. You also have the moon in a very small aspect relationship with Uranus, which we would expect because you do have the exact opposition of Moon Uranus within your natal chart. That's another corroboration of this notion of wanting to go about this via potentially non traditional means. You also have Chiron there as well, Moon at 334, and the Chiron is at 340. Very often within the context of my astrology, I haven't been able to test this from a midpoint perspective, but I have been able to test this from a regular schmegular astrology perspective. Very often within the context of my astrology, whenever a person has the moon Chiron as a story within their chart, they oftentimes have a very stressful maternal story within their chart. And some of the ways how that manifests is people say that my mother didn't love me. My mother wanted a boy, but she had a girl. My mother wanted a dog, but she had a kid. My mother locked herself in the bedroom and said she'd commit suicide. My mother locked herself in the bedroom and did actually commit suicide. My mother was on horse tranquilizers her entire life because she had mental instability and she couldn't be a mother. People who have mourned Chiron stories 9 times out of 10 have the most harrowing stories of their experience of motherhood in the world. And as a result of that, they may not necessarily want to step into the role of motherhood themselves. You also have Saturn at 138 exactly on your moon midheaven midpoint. And that can also be another indication that within this lifetime, your story of motherhood and being mothered could have been such that it felt that that wasn't necessarily something that you had the most stable relationship around growing up yourself. And as a result of that, that could have created these larger issues for you that said, well, hey, if my mom wasn't able to do that for me, why do I think that I have within myself the internal architecture in order to do that for another human being? So that's one of the ways how that can show up from a paternal perspective. The last thing we're going to look at on your very lovely chart is we're going to take a look at your 5.625, the 64th harmonic, and see what's going on within this chart as far as your Venus Zeus midpoint is concerned, because Venus Zeus is one of the midpoints of pregnancy. Your Venus Zeus at 205. And as we scroll down and take a look at what is happening at 205, you have Venus Zeus equals at Mitos exactly. And having Venus Zeus equals at Mitos says to us once again that if there is a story of childbirth within your life, it could very well be a very limited story in terms of, and mitos is something that shrinks things, it's something that makes things smaller, it's something that causes shrinkage. So basically, this could be another indication that we have a wonderful bouncing baby something, and that is our child, and we love that child forever and ever. Amen. Is one of the ways how the Venus Zeus equaling at Mitos could manifest. You also have Hades, not that far from the Venus Zeus as well. And the Hades story on your Venus Zeus midpoint could say that there could have been a story of pregnancy or childbirth within your life already, and that could have manifested as something that was less than desirable, or your own encounter with that could have been something that was less than desirable because of some interaction that you may have had with someone, or because of some other ways that might have made that be a story of very real potential pain or suffering or trauma within your experience that might have made this notion of giving birth be something that seems like a hard no for you. And however, at this time, since giving birth is something that you're wanting to do, having the Admetos on the Venus Zeus is just further corroboration of what I said before in terms of the one and done situation. And while you should be as fruitful and multiply as much as you want, and at the same time, from an astrological perspective, it seems from my astrological perspective, and once again, I'm not Jesus, I don't know everything, but it seems from my astrological perspective that this is looking like a one and done situation. And to answer your question as to whether or not it will happen at all, it definitely looks like the answer is yes. Now, the when is a multifaceted question, and we don't really have the time to get into that. But from the perspective of will it happen, the answer is definitely seeming to be more of a yes than a no. Was this helpful for you?
So helpful. Thank you so much. Just to like touch on a couple of things. Yes, definitely more career oriented historically. Neptune, Mars, existential crisis with work all the time. Um, the part about the menstrual irregularity, I don't have that. It's pretty regular, but when I was younger, I used to have a much harder time coping with my periods because they used to be very, very painful. And then I would say, in terms of like the relationship with my mother, we used to butt heads a lot when I was younger, and it was like on a daily basis. And she like kind of currently drives me crazy to this day, but I do love her a lot, and it's not like a totally negative relationship. But I think it was more of a crisis point when I was younger, and did make me question whether or not I wanted to have kids myself. So that was all super spot on.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, keep me in the loop, and let me know. You could send me the baby photos when they come.
Will do. Thank you so much. I'm a huge fan.
Awesome. You're very, very welcome. If you've enjoyed today's show, then please remember to hit subscribe down below. I'm currently on a mission to get 12,000 subscribers across all platforms, which includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify by the end of November 2023. And it's a tall order, but I'm pretty sure we can do it because we make some really good astrological content here on the Oraculos Podcast. So please remember to hit subscribe down below, hit the notification bell so that you receive notifications of when we come out with these episodes on a daily basis. And please share the Oraculos Podcast with your other astrologically minded friends so that more and more people can know about the amazing work that we're doing over here on the Oraculos Podcast.